Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this third lecture in ME303 heat transfer. So yesterday we ended during our discussion on the mechanism of convection. So let's finish that discussion. So we were talking about the thermal boundary layer that develops during convection. And I told you that similar to the velocity boundary layer that you have learned in your fluid mechanics courses, thermal boundary layer is also very important, especially the gradients on the surface. So when there is a flow happening from left to right and you have a flat plate, that's the easiest, simplest case you can consider. And the temperature on the plate, let's say, is T surface, which is greater than T infinity, which is the temperature of the air that's blowing over the hot surface. So what you see is that there is well, a boundary layer, a hypothetical boundary layer, which is defined in such a way so that the temperature outside the boundary layer stays as T infinity, and the temperature inside varies from T infinity all the way to Ts. So it's Ts here and T infinity here. So there's a variation in the temperature inside the boundary layer. And I told you that in heat transfer, the gradient of temperature, so if I call this T as a function of y, where y is this vertical direction, then this dt by dy is extremely important. That is the gradient of temperature on the surface of the plate. And this will help us calculate the heat transfer coefficient, which I will quickly, which I'll mention very soon, just after my discussion on the types of convection. Okay, so in convection, I'll keep it here because we want to come back to this discussion. So convections of two types, one's called forced convection and the other is called free convection. I hope you can see this part of the board. So forced convection is when the wind or the flow that's happening is produced through an external agent. So that could be a fan, it could be wind, or it could be some sort of an impeller. So forced convection, the word forced comes from what is driving the flow. It has to be an external device that drives the flow, which causes the heat transfer. Now, free convection, on the other hand, does not require any external agent. So free convection happens because of the gravitational field of Earth. As an example, let's take a hot plate or a hot body or a hot cylinder. So when the air, so let's say there is no flow to start with, and you place a hot cylinder on a table, then the air that contacts the hot cylinder around the cylinder will start becoming hotter. Now, the air, that is the hot air, is has a density which is lower than the density of cold air. We know that from our experience of thermodynamics. So hot air, as you know, rises because it is more buoyant than cold air, and the reason it rises up is because of the gravitational direction, which is downwards. So hot air, so cold air is denser, heavier, so it displaces hot air, and then you see that you get these air currents in the room because of the temperature differences. So this air current now that has developed, so this flow that has developed was not produced because of an external agent. It was produced because of the flow field, because of the temperature difference in the room. And this is this flow that is generated because of the gravitational field of the Earth, and of course the temperature difference, is called free convection or natural convection.
Sir?
Yes, please.
So the video quality is like very bad. We are not able to make out what is written on the board.
Okay. Is that the same for the others, or is that just same for? Is that just for you? Can the others comment, please?
It is visible on my screen, but it is quite small. And have very high speed, still I'm getting very like.
So it's fine for me.
It's fine for me. So
Okay, so I think it is a network issue because I also keep checking the quality and the quality is good. So I'll go slow. So I will also keep try to write a bit larger in font. And if it still doesn't work out, then the recording that you will see definitely will be of a better quality. But since I'm going really slow, then I'll just mention that this is forced convection and this is free or natural convection. Okay. So I told you that, let's take another example of natural convection, because you saw a video in the first lecture, which was to do with the energy production in a power plant. And towards the end, you saw these huge cooling towers that were used to cool water for the condensers, for the condenser loop. So let's try to understand the cooling tower. So I'll draw a cooling tower here. Try to draw it as large as possible. And you may have seen these cooling towers are typical for especially the nuclear power plants. If you, whenever somebody talks about a nuclear power plant, they tend to draw these cooling towers. Of course, these cooling towers are not specific to nuclear power plants, but it's become a habit to relate nuclear power plants with these cooling towers, because you want to cool things in your nuclear power plants, and hence we need these large cooling towers. Now, the job of a cooling tower is simply to cool hot water. So you want to reduce the temperature of water that's coming in. So the hot water enters, that's an input to the cooling tower, and cold water leaves as an exit to the from the cooling tower. So what happens inside a cooling tower is, again, the mechanism is again very intuitive. You remember your earthen pots or matkas. So the way you cool water in an earthen pot is you put water in the earthen pot, and then because of the tiny pores, the water starts seeping out, and then it evaporates. And water, when evaporates, it takes away the latent heat and cools down the remaining water. So at the loss of some amount of water as water vapor, you end up cooling the other remaining water. That's the same thing that's happening here. So the shape of this cooling tower is hyperbolic, and it helps in the driving some flow. So it sucks in dry air from the atmosphere, and then of course air leaves from the top. And what you do is you have some sort of a mesh somewhere near the bottom part of the cooling tower, and you feed in hot water. So the hot water is fed in, and there is a mesh, or it's called a fill material. So it sprays lots of hot water on this mesh, and since you have dry air that was sucked in from the bottom rising up, so that dry air takes away moisture, and that's basically causing evaporation. And there's lots of area, large area, to cause evaporation effectively. And as the water evaporates, the remaining water in the fill material cools down, and it starts dropping down as water droplets at the bottom, and there is some sort of a collector plate at the bottom that collects this cold water. And then this hot, moist air rises up, and then of course you don't really want to lose the water, because since if you lose water, then you have to replenish that, and then water loss is loss of cost. So you have some sort of a material here which traps as much moisture as it can, and then that water also drops down, and ultimately you the driest air possible, which is hot, leaves out. So basically air enters at a colder temperature and leaves at a hot temperature, and in turn it cools down water. The other good thing about this cooling tower is that since you have hot air at the top, so hot air tends to be lighter, so it rises, and when it rises, it creates a vacuum inside the cooling tower that sucks in more air. So it's a air loop that develops, that causes becomes self-sustainable, and then the cooling tower cools down water. Now, the reason you have these cooling towers of huge size, which typically are more than 100 meters in height. Okay, so that's approximately 30 to 40 floors of a building, sometimes even more than that. And the reason you have them as huge cooling towers are because you want to cool things quickly. So it's a rate of heat transfer. If you want a high rate of heat transfer from the water that's being cooled, you would scale up the device accordingly. Okay. Now, cooling towers also, so this is natural convection or a free convection. So we call it a natural draft cooling tower. Now, cooling towers can also be manufactured as a forced draft. That is, instead of having the air driven because of the temperature differences, you can have the air driven because of an impeller. So you can have a fan here that sucks in air and pushes it up. And that is exactly what you may have seen in front of our A4 building. So in front of the A4 building, you have this new center called C4DFED, and they have a large air conditioning room. So the water that they need for the chillers is actually cooled down in these forced draft cooling towers. So we have around 6 of those, which make a lot of noise because of the fans running. So next time you cross the A4 building towards A5, on the right hand side, remember to look at the forced draft cooling towers. And the cooling towers there are much smaller in size. They are approximately 3 to 4 meters in, approximately 5 meters in height. So you can see that forced draft cooling towers can generate the same amount of cooling in a much smaller size as compared to natural or a free draft cooling towers. Okay, so and I will come to that. Why is that the case in a couple of minutes. All right, so in convection, mostly we work with sensible energy. That is, if you remember from thermodynamics, sensible meant the change in temperature. So internal energy in the form of change in the change in internal energy in the form of change in temperature. So what I mean is that here in water, I did not evaporate the water overall. I just changed the temperature of the water that was flowing through the loop. But convection can also work, or the convection currents can also be developed because of the change in latent latent energy or the change in phase. So we have these boiling, for example, applications. You may remember, if you have ever cooked anything, I'm sure you cooked Maggi at least. So you have a pan, a hot pan, and on top of that you have, a hot plate, and on top of that you have a pan which has water in it. It's open at the top. So I've drawn a hot plate with a pan on top of it, and there is water in it. So as the water, as the base of the pan gets hotter and hotter, you see that water boils. So you see these water vapor bubbles, they rise up. So it's not air, it is water vapor. And as it rises up, since it's a bubble rising up in a liquid, so it pushes the water above it, and that pushing of the water creates some sort of a current. So the water starts mixing. Okay, so remember, convection was nothing but losing energy. So what's happening is that in this case, there are two modes in which energy is being transferred from the bottom to the top of the pan. One is these bubbles pushing the water and generating currents. The other one is that these bubbles have taken the energy from the base or the hot plate, and they rise up. So the energy is moving from bottom to top in the form of this latent heat that has been absorbed by the bubbles. So when the bubbles condense later, then they will give back the energy. So the energy transfer is happening from bottom to top, and that is what we talk about. We talk about energy transfer from one direction to the other. Well, in this case also it's going leaving the plate. So we talk about energy transfer. So that energy transfer can either be because of sensible or the temperature change, or it can be because of the latent heat that is being transferred as well. So these are introductions. I'll go into more detail when we start talking about convection in detail. All right, so this was a general discussion on convection. Now let's start talking about modeling, because as I said yesterday, like conduction, convection also has to be mathematically modeled. And as engineers, we need to estimate or design equipment. So we need to be able to model these phenomena as accurately as possible. So for the mathematical modeling of convection, we again do the same thing. We try to estimate the rate of heat transfer. I would want to estimate this Q or well, Q prime as we wrote yesterday. So that's the flux, heat flux, or watts per meter square. So remember that in heat transfer applications, heat enters or leaves from the boundaries. So it's a surface phenomena. Okay, so in this case, we always talk about the rate of heat transfer per unit area. So as you have a larger area, it's intuitive that it will cause more heat to enter or leave depending on what we require. So Q double prime here, it's written as some constant times the temperature difference, which is delta T. Same as what we discussed yesterday. So you have a delta T here, which we call the temperature potential. And you have the well, heat current. So a potential drives a current. Okay. In fact, actually, Q double prime is not the current; it's the Q, which is just watts. But we really don't care about that right now. So the idea is that this delta T is causing a flow of heat, and this is your proportionality constant, which is called the heat transfer coefficient. Okay, the convection heat transfer coefficient, of course. And this law, this is the law, and you remember the name, I'm sure. It's called the Newton's law of cooling. Okay. Again, you have studied that in your physics courses in your school, 11th and 12th standard, and this was also a part of your JEE syllabus, Newton's law of cooling. So this is what Newton's law of cooling is. And remember, we just want to estimate Q double prime given delta T, or we want to estimate the delta T for a desired Q double prime. Okay, and this H is characteristic of the process. So let me ask you intuitively, if I was to estimate the H value for two different processes, one being forced convection and the other being free convection, which case would have a higher H value?
Forced.
So forced.
Forced convection. Thank you very much. So forced convection will have a higher value of heat transfer coefficient. Okay, so delta T is fixed. So let's say my body is at 37 degrees centigrade. Outside it is 10 degrees centigrade. It's winter time, and I have some rate of heat transfer. So the H value, delta T is fixed. So the H value for forced convection is much more than free convection. So if I sit in front of a fan and in 10 degrees centigrade, I'll lose much more heat as compared to just sitting without any wind blowing around me. Okay, so forced convection has a higher value of this heat transfer coefficient because for the same delta T, it causes a higher value of heat transfer out of my body. And this is the reason you require the size of your cooling tower to be much larger for a free draft or a natural draft cooling tower. So these hyperbolic free draft cooling towers have to be larger in size because the H value corresponding to natural convection is small. So you have to scale up everything, increase the area so that you can have the same amount of Q. So Q per meter square may be the same, but if you increase this A, then the Q value will increase. So you can keep on increasing the A or keep on increasing the size until the desired Q value is reached. Okay, so it's always about money. So you have to make sure that when you scale up things, that's a capital cost, and maintaining a queue is the running cost. So you have to make sure that the amount, how you cannot make it infinitely big, because then you'll end up putting so much money in a power plant that it will take you thousands of years until you can break even. Okay, so this sort of calculation is what you do in power plants if you start working in the project management and installing new power plants. But that is a part of the energy conversion systems. So you have a course on energy systems, energy conversion systems. So please, that's an amazing course. It talks about all these things, the application of heat transfer and fluid mechanics into the real energy system application. So please try to, it's an elective. So try to do that if you get a chance. Any questions? All right. So in convection, our main goal is to find the value of H. I mean, depending on the process. Of course, we want to find the Q prime value ultimately, Q double prime, but that depends on the H value. So if I have to increase the rate of heat transfer, all I want to do is increase the H value. So I have to figure out to estimate the H value corresponding to a given situation, and that is what the aim is. So the complete 1 month that we spend on convection will be to estimate the H value. Okay, so let us get a feeling of what the H values are, like we did for the K values yesterday. So let's try to feel, understand, get an idea of what the H values are. So let me write them, the typical H values you get for certain cases. So first we'll talk about the forced convection case. So when you have gases, the value typically is between 25 and 250. Okay, so for forced convection cases, for gases, the value typically is between 25 and 250. And the units are watts per meter square Kelvin. When we go to liquid, so when I say gases, it means that on this flat plate or the surface of the car, there is some wind blowing. So to cool things down, I just blow the fluid, gaseous fluid, so that causes cooling due to convection. When you go to liquids, because liquids are also fluids, so what do you think intuitively? Should the liquids have a higher value of H or a lower value of H?
Higher. Higher, sir.
Higher.
Perfect. So higher is a unanimous answer, which is correct. And I'm sure you understand that from people who swim. So if you swim in cold water, you feel much more colder as compared to standing in the same temperature of air. So water has, or liquids have in general, higher heat transfer coefficient. In fact, they can be orders of magnitude higher than gases. So it can go from 100 to 100,000. Well, depending on the liquid and other conditions. So we'll discuss about that later, but these values, well, it's not 100,000, probably it's a bit large. So we'll say 20K. 20,000 is typical. So this is a range, of course. I mean, it's not a fixed value. It's a typical order of magnitude analysis that we are doing. Let's talk about free convection. So these two were for forced convection. As we know that for free convection, we'll typically have smaller values, and that is again 1 order of magnitude smaller. So the gases will have between 2 and 20 as a typical H value. So if you were to estimate the heat transfer rates for a cooling tower, and you had to estimate the max and the min values, we'll just take values between 2 and 20. So for a value of 2, H equal to 2 watts per meter square Kelvin, you'll do the calculations, and then you'll do the calculations for H equal to 20 watts per meter square Kelvin. Okay. So these are the this is a range, and again liquids. The order again is 1 order of magnitude smaller. So it'll be between 50 and let's say 1000. And I also told you about phase change. So let's say boiling is happening. So if I ask you the estimated heat transfer coefficient for let's say boiling, so what will be your guess as to the order of magnitude of the H value for boiling?
3000.
3000. Okay. Any other guesses? Well, you can think of a range. So if I'm talking about boiling, should it be, let's talk about the minimum number. Do you think that it will be less than 2? So it's the heat transfers lesser than free convection in gases, or it will be more than 100 or more than 1000. So 3000 is one guess. Any other guesses? Abhishek says more than 100. Okay, so 3000 was very close. It's between 2500 all the way to 100,000. Okay. If you want to have large heat transfer rates, then you would use situations where the phase changes. And again, these applications are there in the recent semiconductor cooling. So instead of just increasing the temperature of a liquid, what you do is you feed in liquid, but the liquid becomes a gas, of course, at whatever temperature and pressure it's working. And then the process of, and you already know that when a liquid becomes a gas, it takes a lot of energy out of, absorbs a lot of energy, which is in the form of latent heat, and that increases the rate of heat transfer tremendously. And we have one chapter or one section in the book on boiling and condensation. So we'll be talking about a lot of boiling and condensation as well towards the end of convection. Okay, so a little bit more on convection related to this boundary layer. So if you remember, then we said that convections collectively diffusion or conduction happening on the surface or just above the surface, and advection or bulk flow happening from left to right, higher above the surface in the air. So because just above the surface, because of the no slip condition, the x velocity or the velocity is 0. So that means that there is no flow. I mean, there is no velocity. So convection cannot happen. So it's only conduction. So the solid molecules, they hit the air molecules just above it. And these hotter air molecules, which are stationary, sort of stationary, then they hit the molecules above it, and the other above molecules, since they are moving from left to right, so they take away the energy, and fresh cold molecules come in to absorb more heat. And this is what convection is. So what we do is, what we write is that on the surface, you have conduction happening, and just above it, you have convection happening. So you, and the heat transfer because of conduction is the same as the heat transfer because of convection. Okay? So the molecule that got energy because of conduction is ultimately that energy gets convected out from the top. So the rate of Q because of conduction at the first layer of molecules is the same as the Q because of convection above it. So we can say, and if you remember the Q value that we wrote, the Q was minus K times the area dt by dy that's conduction rate of heat transfer, that is equal to H times A times dt by dy. Again, that is at y equal to 0. So just above y equal to 0, you have convection, and just below that you have conduction. So these two are equal, and that is where this relation helps you calculate the value of H. Okay, so this is the reason I said that this dt by dy, or the slope of this boundary layer, is extremely important. If you can find that, you can find the H value through this formula. Okay.
Sir, for the equation that you have written, q prime is equal to h ts minus t infinity. The q prime is instantaneous or an average, like the current value.
Instantaneous. It's instantaneous.
So, but in the JE or in the 12th class, we study that the power is measured, it cannot be measured instantaneously. And since Q or heat is flux is measured in watts, so I'm getting a bit confused, like how.
I mean, it's the same idea as in continuum mechanics. The density is mass per unit volume. So you have to have some volume to be able to measure the ratio of that mass contained in that volume. But in the limit that ratio of delta m by delta v goes to 0, we define the density. So the idea of continuum mechanics hold here as well in terms of measuring. Of course, you need to have your probe needs to have a finite time measurement to sample the value of energy transferred, but you can still define mathematically the values. Okay? And then the smaller times you can go to, the higher the sampling rate for your probe, the better estimate you'll have for the value of rate of heat transfer.
Yes, sir, got it. And sir, another question is that so H can be dependent on variables like temperature, current temperature, or it will be always constant for particular process.
H, very good question. I forgot to mention that. So H is a function of many things. H is a function of the geometry that we're talking about. H is a function of the temperature that the plate or the body is at. H is a function of the roughness of the surface and many other things. So we'll in convection, that is what we'll do. We'll try to estimate the H values as a function of geometry, as a function of roughness, because the roughness will then affect the flow that happens over it, whether it's laminar or turbulent and so on. So H value is a function of many things. It is not a constant.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a question: can we apply Newton's law of cooling for a convection involving phase change? Well, no, because convection, if it's involving phase change, then it's happening at a constant temperature, which is your boiling temperature. So we cannot. But again, wait till we reach the boiling chapter, and there we will define a way to estimate the H values for. But we will not apply this equation as it is, because the phase change happening is at a constant temperature. Okay, so that was a question. I hope I have answered that properly, because I made a mistake in this equation. So this was supposed to be Ts minus T infinity. So that's the Newton law of cooling, and this is your conduction. So this is the reason you need to estimate dt by dy accurately, or the best way possible, so that if you have this, and Ts and T infinity are things that are given to us, so we can estimate the H value. Well, of course, A gets cancelled out here. Okay. So I'll not talk about convection anymore. Otherwise, I'll because convection is the most important or the most commonly used mode of heat transfer in engineering. So that is the reason we tend to. Well, I will tend to talk more about convection, but that is the reason I really want to stop myself here and move to the next mode of heat transfer, that is radiation. So while I clear the board, do I have any questions from you? So the next mode of heat transfer that we'll talk about is radiation. So it is one of the most neglected modes of heat transfer, and something that's extremely necessary for the life to survive on the planet Earth. You know that every body which is at a non-zero absolute non-zero temperature, which is above the absolute zero temperature, will emit heat in the form of radiation. And you already have learned that the emissive power for a black body is proportional to its absolute temperature to the power of 4. Okay, so this is called the Stefan-Boltzmann law. I'll call it the SB law. The Stefan-Boltzmann law. In this case, sigma is a constant. So that's the Stefan's constant, the Stefan-Boltzmann constant. And EB again is the black body emissive power, so which is in watts per meter square. It's like a flux. And the mode of heat transfer does not require any medium. And that is the reason that from space, we still get the radiation from the sun's surface. So if you have, when we work with engineering applications, this sometimes we neglect a lot, but we should be careful because the amount of energy exchange because of radiation can also be significant and can cause significant errors in our calculations, the estimates that we do, if we simply consider only conduction and convection. So we must be careful as to when this becomes prominent and when we have to apply it. And we'll discuss that a lot in the discussion on radiation towards the end of this course. Now this is for a black body. That is the reason we have a B here. So what it means is that black body is a body which emits the maximum amount of heat theoretically possible at a given temperature. Real bodies are not black bodies, so they will emit something which is a fraction of it, and this epsilon is called the emissivity or the emissive power. Sorry, emissivity only. Okay, so this is a value between 0 and 1, so it may not emit anything depending on what the surface material and finish are. So this epsilon depends on surface material, finish, and other. If you have coated that with something, it depends on many things. Again, so like H, epsilon is something we will work with in our radiation chapter. So what design, what surface, what geometry can I make so that I can control the amount of emission from a body because of radiation, or I can increase or decrease depending on what we really require from the application. Okay, so this is the energy that leaves the body as emission or emissive power. The next one that is interesting in radiation is the energy that body receives. So we receive energy from everything that is around us. So all bodies around us are radiating heat, be it solid, liquid, or even gas. Even the gas at a given temperature, all the molecules are emitting energy out of it. So when some body receives radiation, so that a radiation that's coming towards it is called irradiation, denoted by a G. Okay. So this irradiation that falls on a body can either be absorbed, it can either be reflected or transmitted. In fact, all three of them can happen, or they usually happen. So this is a combination of absorption, reflection, and transmission. I'm giving you a very basic picture right now and telling you what you expect in the future. So we work a lot with absorption. I want to understand how much of the energy will be absorbed, and that depends on some quantity that we call absorptivity. Okay. So the amount of energy absorbed is a fraction between 0 and 1 of G. So if alpha absorptivity is 1, then that means that all the energy that falls on it gets absorbed. It's a black body. If it's 0, that means nothing gets absorbed. All of it either gets reflected or transmitted. If it's opaque, then of course nothing will get transmitted. All of it will, it will get reflected if nothing is being absorbed. Okay, so we tend to estimate the alpha values for different materials, and then that helps us calculate the overall temperatures or the rate of heat transfers. Again, the aim is the same here, to calculate the Q. So this is watts per meter square, so the Q will become E times the area. If we use the word E here, we could have used Q as well. It is just customary in radiation to use the emissive power E here. Okay, so ultimately our job is still the same, to estimate the value of Q, the overall value of Q that's leaving the surface. So if I was to estimate the overall Q value, then I would say that the net radiation heat transfer is whatever's leaving minus whatever is getting absorbed. Okay, that's the net value leaving. So I would tend to write my Q value as so this epsilon sigma T to the 4 is what is leaving, and then what is leaving, and then what is entering is alpha times G. Okay, that's the energy that is being absorbed, and that is the net amount of energy that's this is Q double prime here, because we're talking about per unit area. Okay, so this is what, and then if we talk about the energy being received from some other source which is at some other temperature, so what that source is emitting is what we are receiving. So I can write this as T surrounding to the power 4. I'm sorry for that. Okay, and there are certain bodies for which alpha is equal to epsilon, so we tend to write this as this. Okay, these are called gray bodies. Again, don't worry about them right now, we'll talk about them later. So ultimately you will see that if the body is gray, then epsilon is equal to alpha, and then you get epsilon times sigma T to the 4 minus sigma T surrounding to the power 4 is what ultimately your net Q because of radiation is for that body. Okay, so that is all we'll talk about radiation, and this completes our discussion on the 3 modes of heat transfer. So now the job is to move ahead and talk about modes in detail. But before that, I'll briefly talk about thermodynamics and heat transfer, because we started the discussion as a difference between thermodynamics and heat transfer. So we will see how we can modify the laws of thermodynamics to help us with calculating Q values in certain situations, or at least doing some energy balances which are done per unit time in heat transfer. Okay, sorry, before that I must talk about thermal radiation, because thermal resistance. So I briefly talked, I've been talking about, sure you can see this part. So I've been talking about a delta T resulting in some sort of heat transfer, and like you have in electric circuits, you have V or delta V, the potential difference equals I times R. So here the equivalent of I is Q, and the equivalent of delta V is your delta T, and this R is RT, in fact, we call the thermal resistance. Okay, so in conduction, convection, or radiation, we'll tend to write the overall heat transfer equations as this. Okay, so we'll try to estimate the thermal resistance for a given geometry, body, shape, and so on, and then we'll see if the resistance is very high, then that means that energy is being lost. We'll try to reduce the resistance if we want to increase the rate of heat transfer, and so on. So the good thing is that all the rules of all the rules that you learned in electric current, for example, Kirchhoff's law, Wheatstone bridges, and so on, adding and resistances in parallel, series. So all of them will be valid in this course as well, except that you won't have an electrical resistance, you will have a thermal resistance, which is coming from, so I'll give you a situation where you have a wall that you are, and you're insulating the wall of the room with 3 layers. The first layer is wood, the second layer is a gap of air, the third layer is a glass wood. So I'll ask you, what will be the temperature difference between the two sides given heat transfer rate, and so on. So you will use the idea of thermal resistance by adding them in series or parallel, depending on what. So we will be using this idea, so I thought I'll talk about this briefly. All right, as I said that, let's quickly talk about thermodynamics and how we can use the ideas of thermodynamics in heat transfer. So I'll talk about some theoretical ideas today, and then we'll solve a problem in our next lecture on Monday to reinforce those ideas. Because I'll give you some time on the weekend to read. So I'll be sharing with you some reading assignments. So if you would like, you can read those sections in the book. So the book discusses things in a much more detail. So your understanding of heat transfer will become much more concrete if you make it a habit to read the book as well, especially at least the reading assignments or the topics I give you to read. So let's quickly discuss about thermodynamics and heat transfer. So let's start with the first law. So the first law is nothing but the conservation of energy. In this case, since we're talking about systems where the flow is happening, so we'll be using an open system for discussion. So we tend to draw open systems as dotted lines. So that means that both energy and mass can enter and leave the system if required. So what will happen is that some energy will enter. In fact, we'll call the rate of energy entering. So we'll use a dot on the top. So E in with a dot on the top, and some energy will be leaving. E out with a dot on the top. And in the process, well, some energy may be getting generated inside the volume. Let's say some reaction happening, some electrical wire going, which is generating heat because of resistive heating. So we'll call it EG, E with a subscript G on the with a dot on the top. That's rate of energy, rate of the watts being generated inside the volume. And then ultimately we have some E stored with a dot. Okay. So the balance equation now becomes so the rate of energy being stored in the system is equal to E dot in minus E dot out plus EG, E dot G. So if the energy being stored inside the system is increasing with time, the rate, sorry, that's because the E in plus EG is greater than the E out. So this is typically what we'll be using in heat transfer rather than, so the dots have been added because we're talking about the rates now in heat transfer. Now, if you talk about the ways or the types of energies that can be stored or that can be moved in and out of the system, then we will say that the E stored, let's say for example, the energy being stored inside a volume. Let's take example. So you can have it in the form of kinetic energy. So you may be having a fluid that is moving really fast in whatever hypothetical boundaries that you have drawn. So that energy, because of that fluid moving very fast, is kinetic energy. Okay, so it can be kinetic energy. It can be potential energy. You may have a control volume where there's water sitting at a very high tank. So that energy that is contains is called potential energy. So together we can have mechanical energy, me. That's the energy. So energy can be stored in these two forms. It can also be stored as internal energy, which could either be sensible or latent. So I'll call it IE. Sensible means the hot fluid. So if you have a fluid which is hot, that has lots of energy in it. If you have a gas, it's got a lot of energy in it because it absorbed energy to transform a liquid from gas. So the gas by itself has lots of energy in it. So sensible plus latent. Now we can have other forms of energy, for example, chemical. So you have bonds between molecules. So that is chemical energy. Okay, so you have to give energy. The bonds that have been made made because of energy exchange. So you have chemical energy, and you also may have nuclear energy. Okay, so the bonds, so-called bonds between neutrons and protons inside the nucleus, that's nuclear energy. So that's also energy. But of course, in this course, we'll not be interested in these two. So we will not talk about there's no chemical reaction or nuclear reaction that we'll be talking about. So this is not of our interest. So we'll be talking about energy in the form of kinetic, potential, and sensible and latent in this course. Of course, I mean you understand these things from thermodynamics, but I just thought that I'll mention about this. Now, all these energies which are stored and are exchanged from the boundaries as E in or E out. Of course, energy flows in. Kinetic energy can enter. Fast moving fluid can enter the system. It can leave the system. You can enter. Fluid can enter with high, like in a tank with lots of height. You can also have hot fluid entering or gas entering. So this E in and E out also will have these kind of things. But E generated typically will be electrical in nature. So we'll say that if you have a wire going which is getting heated, so that's because of resistance. So that energy getting generated is not of this form but something else. And generation of energy usually is talked in terms of volumetric generation. So we say that the generation of energy is per unit volume. So that's a volumetric phenomena. But energy of these kinds are surface phenomena. So when energy moves in or moves out, that happens to the boundary of the control volume, whatever your control volume of interest is. So E in and E out typically are surface phenomena. So we write them as per unit area, but EG we typically write that as per unit volume. I just want to mention that. But when we solve a problem next week, Monday, then these things will become much more clear. So I'll stop here. And in case you have any questions, please feel free to ask.